working, testing, beautiful. Third time's the charm. Well, welcome in, everyone. Thank y'all so much for coming in tonight. Just a real quick reminder to please make sure that phones are silenced or turned off before the performance. Let's give a Glenair welcome.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. I just appreciate everything that you're doing to make this possible. The recording crew back there is hard at work, and Christine, Lily, thank you for having me. So, my name is Robert. I'm going to play some classical piano. Maybe I'll throw in a little gospel at the end, old time Southern gospel. But first things first. So, what I like to do first is kind of what I was doing before the official start, just noodling, improvising. Because improvising is really the root of it all, I think. Not just in all types of music, but for some odd reason in Western classical music, that tradition, we've sort of lost the improvising tradition. I mean, there are a lot of players who do it. A lot of players who do it much more fluently than I do, but I just think it's something that is enjoyable and important to do. It's important because the music, all these great composers, their music comes out of improvisation. So there are different ways we can approach it. Sometimes I'll ask for a popular tune and I'll play it in the style of a composer. That's kind of silly. I was thinking tonight, a little bit like last time I think we did, is you're going to give me, if you don't mind, some random notes, and just maybe 4 or 5 or 6 notes, and we'll make a theme out of that, and maybe you'll give me a title, and then we'll see what happens, because we never know what happens. It's improvising. So I'm the one who's really scared. So you can pick any note. You can sharp it or flat it, if you like. So let's start with one note. Anybody?
B flat.
B flat. Very good. E natural. That's what we're doing. Another one? F. That resolves it nicely. Thank you. Okay. Couple more. C. You can throw in a wild card if you want. Let's do one more note. What do you say? D sharp. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, that'll work in B flat, but it's not conventional. So something like that. Okay. If I could remember. What do you want the title to be, or what do you want it to be about? It could be anything. Good meal? What do you say? Vegan meals? Well, it depends on one's opinion of that. That's okay. How it would sound. Maybe something else. I don't know if it. Yeah? I'm sorry?
It sounds like the beginning of Moonlight Sonata.
It could, yeah. How about something, how about Winter Blues? Okay, let's call it Winter Blues, and it's going to be in the style of the late 18th, early 19th centuries. How's that? Back when the blues was a really popular form of blues. All right, here goes nothing. Let's see what happens. That's it, right? that was odd. It usually happens like that. It starts with what I think it's going to be, and then it takes on a life of its own. So it didn't really end up being all that 18th and 19th century, maybe late 19th century. At any rate, speaking of the 19th century, I'm going to play first a very large piece. It's actually just one movement of a large work, but it's quite long. And this will be sort of the meat and potatoes of the day, of the evening. Still doing this theme, and probably will be for a little more time. It was the same as the summer, which is I'm playing violin music arranged for the piano. And there's a reason for this. In short, I'm obsessed with the violin. I love the great violinists of the past, like Nathan Milstein was his birthday a couple days ago. Jascha Heifetz, Yehudi Menuhin, Ivry Gitlis was a big hero for me. All of these great violinists, you can see them, hear them in this PBS documentary called The Art of Violin. And what happened to me is I sort of wanted to switch to the violin recently, a few years ago. And my wife, as a pianist, talked me out of it very wisely. She said, it's not worth it. You know, we have 2 small kids, we have 2 cats, it's just, no way. So plan B has been to play all these arrangements of violin music. And I just keep finding more and more things to keep this fantasy alive, which is I'm pretending to be a violinist, but through the piano. Beethoven's Violin Concerto, he wrote it in 1806. It's one of the most loved, maybe it is the most loved violin concerto out there. But it wasn't at the time. At the first performance, most of the audience fell asleep after the first movement. I hope you won't. I don't think so, but the violinist Franz Clement noticed this, and in between the first and second movements, he took his violin, he turned it upside down, improvised a lively country fiddle tune to wake everybody up, and then they proceeded with the second and third movements. Could you imagine that at Carnegie Hall or Kennedy Center? But that was the time. That's the thing I liked, that it was a more, there was more flexibility in some way. It was more like a rock concert. It was spontaneity. But Beethoven, you can imagine, was not thrilled at all. And he consulted his good friend Muzio Clementi, another great composer, wonderful composer. And Clementi suggested, he said, why don't you rewrite it, Louis? No, I don't think he called him Louis. He said, why don't you rewrite it as a piano concerto? And Beethoven did. But both versions, the violin version and the piano version, were sort of shelved. They weren't really done. And it was after Beethoven had died, it was Mendelssohn and the Hungarian violinist Joachim who they kind of resurrected the work. And to this day, the violin concerto is one of the most loved performed concertos of all for the violin. But this piano version exists. And some people do it, not a whole lot of people play it, but you can see how it sort of fits in with what I'm trying to do. So not to be too confusing here, but what I've done is a piece for soloist and orchestra. So obviously I don't have an orchestra here, but I've made a sort of my own arrangement that includes a lot of the orchestra parts. Not all, because I only have 10 fingers, I can't do everything that the orchestra does, but I've taken the piano concerto version of the violin concerto, I've made it solo. Anyway, the point is, I'll say a few things about this piece. First of all, like so much Beethoven, it doesn't really have any memorable tunes. Beethoven, Leonard Bernstein talked about this. He said, Beethoven wouldn't write a melody that you would remember, that would just stick to you. Schubert could do that, Tchaikovsky perhaps, but Beethoven not so much. I mean, you know the famous, everybody knows, what's that? Is that a melody? This violin concerto starts with the timpani playing. That's just 4 notes, what's that? But, and then there's this, that's almost to me, one violinist, Christian Tetzlaff, he said that those drum motifs, it evokes the military thing. Beethoven was very disenchanted at this time with Napoleon, who he had loved at first, but invaded Austro-Hungary, Vienna, and Beethoven was not happy. The Eroica Symphony, he originally named it the Bonaparte, or the Napoleon Bonaparte Symphony. Scratched the title after Napoleon invaded. But there's this militaristic thing of the drum idea. So you have even, that's the same bum, bum, bum. It just has this almost this military connotation. But then there are these other parts. Childlike in a way. And that's not really a catchy tune. It's a scale. It's just. But what Bernstein said is that Beethoven takes these sometimes even banal ideas and he turns them into magic. And he did it through great effort. He would write and rewrite and cross out, and there are food stains, wine stains, tear stains even on his manuscripts, because he literally struggled over every note. And that theme of struggle is something that was part of his life too. Huge part of his life. Because in 1806, when he wrote this, that was the time that he was fully coming to terms with the fact that he was losing his hearing. And he wrote about this in a letter. If you can read it, it's very moving. The Heiligenstadt Testimony. He talks about this, what it's like to lose his hearing. And that he's in the countryside, one of his favorite places. By the way, this is a very pastoral piece. That he was with some friends and they heard a shepherd singing and he couldn't hear it. And he was so distraught about this. He started to isolate himself around this time. And can you imagine if they had hearing aids, how much different his life would be? And you know, Beethoven at that time, he even contemplated taking his own life at one point. He writes about that in the letter. But he somehow found this inner resolve to keep going. And I think the violin concerto is a piece about philosophical acceptance. And anyone can relate to that because we all have things in our life that's not, you know, the ideal or something we don't exactly want, but we have to, and we can come to a sort of philosophical acceptance. I think that's what Beethoven's all about, really. You can't summarize him like that, but Beethoven has this universal reach. I'll say one more thing about that universality, that I had a professor say that Beethoven is Tolstoy in music. And I had no idea what he meant at the time. But then I read some of Tolstoy's essays, especially What is Art?, where Tolstoy writes, he's backstage in an opera theater, and he said, what's all this commotion for? When there's genuine suffering in the world, why do we even bother with the arts? And that's a good question. But then he concludes by saying, if one person leaves that production with a little more sensitivity in their heart, it's done its job. That's Tolstoy, and I think Beethoven he does that. And I think that, to me, that's the meaning of that quote from that professor I had, that Beethoven is Tolstoy in music. It has that almost an ethical thing. This teacher said it this way. He said it goes beyond aesthetics into ethics. I thought that was really interesting. So, but anyway, I think I'm rambling a little bit. I'm going to play the piece. It's quite long. It's like 25 minutes. You know, you could drive to Chapel Hill Park in that time, practically. And it's long. So here it is. told you it was long. But there's some interesting things about this. So my violinist friends get kind of mad at me about this. They say, you're playing our repertoire, and you have a lot of your own. Well, there's an interesting point about this piece, and it raises the question, how can we be most pure and authentic in music? I don't know if there's an answer to that, because we don't have recordings of Beethoven or whatnot. But there's one little feature, it's not a little feature, but the issue of cadenzas. A cadenza is a place or a space in a concerto for improvisation. And in the time of Mozart or before, the composers would leave the space blank and you would improvise. Beethoven, although he was a genius improviser, he wrote his cadenzas out. But he did not notably write a cadenza for the violin concerto. Cadenzas, he did not. Most violinists play Fritz Kreisler's cadenza. I might play some Kreisler, another great figure in music. But for the piano version, Beethoven did write cadenzas. So that gets kind of unusual. I'll tell that to my violinist friends when they start saying, what's the matter with you? You're playing our pieces. Well, what about cadenzas? Well, what about it? We play Kreisler. I said, but the piano version has Beethoven's own. And some violinists, there's Wolfgang Schneider, I think his name, and then another one. But there are violinists who've made their own arrangements, get this, of the piano cadenza for the violin. So everybody's just stealing from everybody, and the point is, it gets complicated to say which one is. At any rate, I'm going to play some short pieces because everything is short after that. It's long, but it needs to be long. I think when you get to the last page and the theme comes, it all makes sense. It's like you've been on this journey with Beethoven. I just think it has to be that length. But at any rate, I'm going to play a short piece by Tchaikovsky. This is called Melody in E flat major, which he wrote for violin originally and intended it to be part of his violin concerto. The Tchaikovsky is based on the Beethoven, it's in D major, same key. But for some reason, Tchaikovsky sort of chucked this piece and wrote something else for the concerto. But he left it as a solo violin and piano piece. This is obviously the piano version. Tchaikovsky he was Russian. But the funny thing is, his contemporaries, people like Glinka or maybe Glinka was a little before him, Borodin, Mussorgsky, those guys, they didn't consider him Russian enough, whatever that's supposed to mean. They thought he was more of a French-like composer, like in the vein of Massenet or something. But the titles of his pieces are often in French like this too. He didn't use quite as much folk music as they did. But again, these purity contests and bickering between musicians, it gets kind of silly. It's a wonderful thing that this never happens today. No, I'm just kidding, it doesn't. So, I mentioned also at the end, I mentioned Southern Gospel. I'll get to that in a bit. People ask me, what's with the classical and the Southern Gospel? Why? So, well, it's because both of my parents are immigrants. My mother's an immigrant from the Soviet Union. I saw my parents today, it was nice. They live in Chapel Hill, so, my mother's an immigrant from the Soviet Union. That's where my love of classical, especially Russian music, came from. My father's an immigrant from southeastern Virginia. Yeah, and I grew up, maybe like some of you, I grew up in New Jersey. I don't advertise a lot, but yeah, right. Jersey is underrated. It's underrated. We have the best pizza, and I will fight anyone. I'm just kidding, but sorry, I don't believe in violence. But but at any rate, I grew up in New Jersey, and so here I'm from my mother listening to all this classical music, from my dad listening to all this Ralph Stanley, Bill Monroe, all these things. So anyway, that kind of explains me a little bit. Here's Tchaikovsky, Melody in E flat. One more thing, that Tchaikovsky's melodies are long-winded, they're almost endless. Beethoven has almost little curt ideas, like bum bum bum, I showed you the Fifth Symphony theme. Tchaikovsky likes long melodies. It's like long sentences Russian writers will often, Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, they'll write a sentence that will take up a whole page. And the funny thing is, Southerners do the same thing, Faulkner. And anyway, I'm talking too much, but I've noticed that relatives on both sides of my family, the Russians and the Southerners, they're kind of the same in the sense that they like to tell long stories that never end. And maybe I got that from them. So this is Tchaikovsky has this long melody that just never seems to punctuate. It just goes on and on and on. So here it is. Late 19th century piece. This is an arrangement of Fritz Kreisler's. It's the Viennese Caprice, the Caprice Viennois, which is sort of between a lullaby and a waltz. It's a waltzy lullaby. Because the Viennese are just, the waltz infuses everything pretty much in Vienna. So Fritz Kreisler was this, he was born in Vienna, of course. Actually, a lot of the great composers were not. They ended up in Vienna, like Beethoven was from Bonn. But only Kreisler and Schubert, really, maybe there's a few others, they were actually born in Vienna, didn't migrate from somewhere else. Like Brahms was from Hamburg, ended up in Vienna. And there's it's a 19th century joke contrasting places like Hamburg and Berlin and Vienna. How do you tell the difference between the two cultures? Well, you see a place like Berlin, and I would say Beethoven's music too, things are very serious, but there's always hope. Beethoven has a lot of hope, right? In Vienna, the Johann Strauss Jr., the waltzes and all that, and Schubert too, with his Ländlers, things are not so serious, but there's no hope. You know, that's the difference. Because Vienna, on the one hand, you know, you've seen the New Year's concerts for Vienna, and it's all this glamour and glitz and everything, but that's one side of Vienna, and it's very real and it's wonderful. And there's a word for it, Gemütlichkeit. It means coziness, it means contentment. It's just Vienna. It's the word for Vienna, Viennese culture. But then Vienna has this dark side too. And a lot of the expressionist painters, you know, were from there. I think Kandinsky, wasn't he from? Schoenberg, by the way, who's Arnold Schoenberg, a lot of his manuscripts, did you hear about this, were burned in the fires in LA. Because Schoenberg, like Chrysler, was Jewish, and when the fascism and anti-Semitism rose in Vienna, they got out. They came to this country, luckily. Many were not so lucky. And it's a horrible thing to think that this culture of Vienna, which somebody like Chrysler or Schoenberg in a different way, but in an equally important way, exemplified that culture, but that culture just rejected them in this ugly, ugly way. So Vienna is such a mixed bag, and that's, a lot of people don't love to hear the music of Schoenberg, Weber, and Berg. And I say, you know, one has to face that side, not only of human nature, but of Vienna. It was not all just fun and happy, and it was both. But if anything, Chrysler, his music is the light and positive side of Vienna, even though he went through, you know, literal hell in living it. But, you know, the thing is, there was a historian, I think they said, Vienna in the 20th century waltzed right off of a cliff into an abyss, and that's how I would describe it. But to more happy things, because Chrysler was basically a very cheerful and good-natured person. Not all these classical composers were. I don't think Beethoven was warm and fuzzy, sorry. Chrysler, if you see pictures of him, video clips of him, he's always smiling. And I tell people this, if you're ever in a not-so-good mood, go to YouTube and listen to Fritz Chrysler playing the violin, recordings of him. You'll smile. And he was almost always smiling. And there's a story about him, maybe I told you last time, I don't remember, but it's a good story, that Chrysler, you know, he lived in America in his later years and would tour, would perform, but he hated to practice. He never practiced. Maybe he didn't need to, but he didn't. And he would sit in Central Park and just look at the trees, smile, talk to people. He had this quote, I love it. He said, "I don't go perform concerts, I simply go places to see my friends." Isn't that lovely? And so here's the story about Chrysler. He was giving a recital with Rachmaninoff in Carnegie Hall. And Rachmaninoff, they were friends, but Rachmaninoff was like the polar opposite of him. Tall, serious, Russian, always frowning. Someone said with his shaved head, he looked like an escaped convict, you know? So, they're such opposites, kind of like almost like a Laurel and Hardy combination. So, Rachmaninoff's at the piano, Chrysler's on the violin, on the fiddle, whatever. And he messed up. And he walks over to Rachmaninoff and he whispers, "Where are we?" And Rachmaninoff gruffly blurts out, "Carnegie Hall." You know? I love that story. It's just, you know, they sort of played pranks on each other. So here's the waltzy lullaby, Viennese Caprice. This is, I'd call it a tribute to his hometown. It's a tribute to Vienna. So here it is. wit, right? Was it the Congress of Vienna in the early 19th century? Is that what it was? There was a big meeting of politicians and people in Vienna, and it was, if I'm not saying it wrong, but the Congress of Vienna. And I read a letter someone had written about it, and they said, we didn't get anything done because all anybody wanted to do was go out and dance waltzes. That's Vienna. You know, we didn't get anything accomplished. So at any rate, I'm going to play some Spanish music now to close the classical part. Is it okay if I go a little over 8? I won't. Is it okay? If you need to go, thank you. I respect, people's schedules. If you have to go, please don't do that. But just a little, no, I won't do that because then I got to get home. So I'm going to play some Spanish music now, also violin related. And I saw this silly thing on social media. It's really silly, but there's some truth to it. That there's 2 parts of Europe, roughly. There's butter Europe and olive oil Europe. So if you go to, it's true, right? Paris, London, Berlin, they cook with butter. And then you go to places like Italy and Spain, they cook with olive oil. So I think that was all butter Europe we just had. Tchaikovsky for sure. And then now we go to olive oil Europe. Okay, so this is a piece called Habanera by Pablo de Sarasate. Sarasate was this great Spanish violinist. And there's some recordings of his. I'm an old recording fanatic. You can find a lot of these on YouTube. Great artifacts to hear Pablo de Sarasate himself play. The recordings are scratchy, but they're just amazing. So, the habanera isn't that a pepper? It's a type of, but it's also a dance. With the roots are actually Cuban, Afro-Cuban. Cuban music's a mixture of Spanish music and West African music. And for some reason, the habanera made its way from Cuba over to Spain in the 19th century, became a hit. I'm going to play you the rhythm of a habanera, and you're going to immediately hear a familiar tune in your head. What's that? Yeah. With one finger, but yeah, not very good. And Bizet was French, of course, but the dance just permeated all of Europe. It just became all the rage. And so that's what this piece is. I'll tell you a little bit about the music of Spain, which is, it's flamenco music, essentially. It is what it is. And flamenco music is a melting pot of styles, because Spain is and was a melting pot. You go back to the Middle Ages, Spain was Arabic. And there was also a large Jewish population in places like Cordoba, Seville. And it was all before the Inquisition. And so there was this mixing of all of those types of music. It's really kind of amazing. And then flamenco really is rooted in all of that, because if you listen to, ancient, the way rabbis would chant, or cantors would chant prayers in the Middle East, it has that, you can hear the connection with flamenco. If you listen to Arabic lute music, that's really flamenco. So, anyway, Spanish music is this wonderful blend of so many things. So here's the habanera by Pablo de Sarasate. When I play it, I imagine a bullfighter or someone. That's not a very insightful thing to say, but that's just what I have in my head, because it's so Spanish. So here it is. Move these a little bit. It's workout, sweat, so. short Spanish piece. This is the only piano piece on this whole program. And there is a violin version, I found one, but this is, it was originally written for the piano. It's a famous piece, the Malagueña by Ernesto Lecuona. And Lecuona was Cuban, like my late teacher Solomon Mikovsky, who begged me to never learn this. He said, he told me with his wonderful accent, he said, "No, you are not from Cuba or Spain. You cannot understand how to play it." You know, I would imitate him. He thought it didn't sound like him, but it sort of does. So, but at any rate, he said, "Don't do it," you know. And this lady at another place I played would beg me to learn it, so I got very guilty and I learned it. Still don't know if I quite have the style. I think, I'm saying my teacher, Minkowski, was right, actually, I think. So, funny thing, yes, it's the only actual piano piece on this program. But it is, you know, although Lecuona's Cuban, the music is about Spain, and Malagueña means a woman from Malaga. And Malaga is a city in the south of Spain. It is like one of maybe the capital of flamenco music. So this is a flamenco piece. You've probably maybe heard this on guitar. And the idea of a Cuban composer writing a Spanish piece, you know, you could imagine Gershwin writing a piece about England, or Duke Ellington writing a piece about Ireland. It's similar. So what else would I say about this? Yeah, it's flamenco. This is really a flamenco piece. So we'll close with that, the classical part, then a little gospel, and then we'll call it a night or a day. So thank you very much. two gospel pieces, just maybe straight through. The first one is an old gospel tune from the 19th century, I think. It's called "Will There Be Any Stars in My Crown?" This is actually an old movie from 1950 with that title. It's a Western, if you like old Westerns. Free on YouTube, that's nice. So, and then I'm gonna play "When They Ring Those Golden Bells," but in two different styles. First, in a more straightforward style, maybe like Tennessee Ernie Ford would sing like that. And then I'm gonna do a sort of a Louisiana, maybe a little Jerry Lee Lewis style, and close with that. Yeah, he played a lot of gospel, he died recently. He was an interesting character, not too different from Liszt in a way, because Liszt was also torn between the, how do we put it, wine, women, and song, the rock star life, and the religious life. Liszt sort of became a priest in later years, and I think of Jerry Lee Lewis, who was kind of similarly conflicted. Anyways, here's some gospel. I'm going to start with "Will There Be Any Stars in My Crowns?" call it, well, that'll be it. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it. And have a wonderful evening. Take care and stay warm.